Why did Admiral James Harrington hesitate that morning, standing before a wall of names he could never forget? The rain had begun to fall gently, droplets tracing across the polished granite of the memorial wall. 57 names, 57 men he had commanded, fought beside or buried. He never allowed himself tears, but the rain disguised what the heart refused to show. His dress uniform was immaculate, his posture unbent, yet the truth pressed heavy in his chest. Every name was a memory, a debt he could never repay. And this morning, something troubled him more deeply than the ache in his knee or the endless stream of Pentagon orders. Something he could not shake. They were changing his teams. He whispered the words into the stone, speaking not to the wall but to one name carved near the bottom: Michael Townsend, a brother-in-arms from Desert Storm, a man who had thrown his body between Harrington and death in a Kuwaiti alley. Townsend had earned the Silver Star. Harrington wore it instead. That injustice had never left him. "They're changing things, Mike," Harrington murmured. "Not sure you'd recognize what they're doing to us." The message he'd received the night before still gnawed at him. The first female candidates in history would begin SEAL training, a pilot program, a political move, not his choice, not his fight, but now his responsibility. And responsibility was heavier than any weapon. When he finally turned from the wall, his jaw was locked, his mind already preparing for the fight he could not avoid. He walked toward the command center, rain dripping down his cap, every step tugging at the scarred joint in his leg, a relic from Kandahar. The pain reminded him of the cost of combat, a truth he feared Washington had forgotten. Inside, the briefing room hushed the moment he entered. 8 officers sat around the table, dossiers open, faces expectant. On the wall screen, Project Athena Integration Initiative. History, they called it. He called it something else. "Gentlemen," Harrington began as he sat at the head of the table, "I understand we're making history. Let's make sure it's the right kind." But before the youngest officer could finish outlining the candidates' resumes, the door opened, and the atmosphere shifted. Colonel Robert Maxwell, the man who once walked like a shadow through jungles and deserts, a sniper whose name was spoken with reverence and fear. The Iron Man, older now, but no less commanding. Harrington felt the old scar of rivalry ache as Maxwell moved with that same unbending grace, lowering himself into the empty chair beside him. Uninvited, but not unwelcome it seemed to the Pentagon. The history between them was bitter. A disagreement during the Gulf War had split them, each never forgiving though both had survived. And now here he was, consulting, watching, judging. Maxwell skimmed the files and stopped on one name: Emma Carson. The name meant nothing to most in the room, but Maxwell knew it well. Her father, John Carson, had been a legend in Delta Force, killed in Afghanistan years ago, a man Maxwell admitted had once saved his life under fire in Basra. "She's good," Maxwell said softly, almost reverently. "Better than good. Her father trained her before she could even ride a bike. She's different." But Harrington's reply was sharp, cold. "Civilian competition isn't combat." Maxwell didn't flinch. Talent is talent, and she has it. The tension between the two men grew thick, their words circling not just over Emma Carson's file but over something unspoken: fear, pride, maybe guilt. Harrington was too seasoned to show doubt, but he felt it. Maxwell was too proud to admit his own motives, but he carried them. When the meeting ended, the officers filed out, leaving the two veterans alone. Harrington confronted him. "You recommended her. Why?" Maxwell's eyes held the weight of 30 years of memory. "Because John Carson was more than just a soldier. He was my brother. He carried me when I should have died. I owe him everything, and his daughter deserves her chance." "This isn't about fairness," Harrington snapped. "It's about lives." But Maxwell, calm as stone, leaned closer. "Or maybe it's about your fear, Jim. The same fear men felt when Black Americans were allowed to serve. When integration came, Every time the argument was the same, and every time history proved them wrong. Harrington said nothing, but the words lingered. That night the candidates arrived at Fort Bragg, 20 men, 1 woman. Emma Carson stood at the end of the line, auburn hair tied back, green eyes fixed forward. Not the tallest, not the strongest, but there was something in her presence. The silence around her was heavy, but her posture was unyielding. She knew every eye was on her, not with welcome, with doubt. Maxwell and Harrington watched from above as the first tests began. A 5-mile run in full gear. The Alpha, Sullivan, a decorated Army Ranger, took the lead. A man born from military lineage, with medals and confidence to spare. Carson didn't chase. She ran steady, mechanical, saving strength, letting others fall away. By the final mile, she surged past the faltering, crossing the line not first but strong. Sullivan glanced at her, not with dismissal this time, but with reluctant respect. Then came the range. Sullivan hit 48 of 50 targets, tight groupings, solid, impressive. Carson stepped forward without swagger, without show. She checked her weapon with calm hands. The order was given. And then the transformation. Every round struck home, 50 out of 50, groupings tighter than anyone before her. Silence followed. Even the instructors whispered. Harrington muttered under his breath, "Beginner's luck." Maxwell chuckled, "Hardly." That evening Harrington found her on the range again, breaking protocol, firing in solitude. Her shots punched perfect holes into the target. When he revealed himself, she stiffened, apologized, stood at attention. But Harrington wasn't angry, he was curious. "Why are you here, Carson? You know the odds, why put yourself through this?" She hesitated, then, "With respect, sir, I'm not interested in odds. My father said the SEALs were the pinnacle, that's where I belong." "And do you understand what's coming?" he pressed. "The psychological strain, the isolation, the constant knowledge that every man here is waiting for you to fail." Her eyes did not falter. "With respect, Admiral, I've been living that my entire life. Men waiting for me to fail isn't new, it's just Tuesday." The words caught him off guard. For the first time he felt something shift in his chest. Not acceptance, not yet, but something like respect. When he returned to his quarters, Maxwell was waiting. The old sniper's voice carried an edge of warning. "There's something you don't know about her, something not in her file." And then he told the story. Of Basra, of John Carson lifting a collapsed beam alone under fire, of carrying Maxwell's broken body a mile to extraction, of going back in alone to finish the mission, of a promise Maxwell made, a promise he could never fulfill. Until now. And Harrington realized, with a slow dread, that Emma Carson wasn't just a candidate. She was the daughter of a man whose shadow still haunted them both. But before he could process, the knock came. News from Washington. A security breach in the Middle East. Hostages. An off-book CIA mission gone wrong. And among the whispers of strategy, one name surfaced. Carson. The Pentagon wanted her, now. Harrington's face hardened. A woman barely begun with training. A candidate, not an operator. And yet she was being called into a war she had not chosen. He turned to Maxwell, eyes cold. "If you knew about this." But Maxwell's shock was genuine. "I swear I didn't, not this." The truth hit Harrington like the weight of all those names on the wall. The game had shifted. His command was being used. His candidates turned into pawns. And Emma Carson, whether ready or not, was about to be tested in ways no training had prepared her for. Sometimes, he thought bitterly, the enemy isn't across the ocean. Sometimes it's in the very rooms where decisions are made. And in that moment, the question that had haunted him all day returned, sharper than ever. Not if she could run, not if she could shoot. But when the time came, when lives depended on her, could she take the shot? Why did the Pentagon call her name? Out of every trained operator, every veteran sniper, why Emma Carson? barely a candidate, not even past Hell Week. Admiral Harrington's boots echoed down the marble corridors of the Pentagon. The hour passed 3 in the morning, silence pressing in like a weight. He had been summoned with no choice. His uniform was immaculate, but inside, anger burned like a slow fire. He'd buried too many men to accept political games. Inside the secure conference room, 4 figures waited. The Secretary of Defense, smooth and confident. A CIA deputy with eyes like knives. A general from Joint Special Operations Command. And Robert Maxwell, looking as though he hadn't slept since leaving Fort Bragg. The secretary gestured to the empty chair. "Admiral, thank you for coming." "I wasn't aware I had an option," Harrington replied, his voice flat. A holographic map sprang to life over the table. A desert compound near the Syrian-Iraqi border. A prison hidden in plain sight. 4 captives, CIA operatives, one of them a woman. Harrington studied the layout, his tactical mind already mapping contingencies. He suggested Delta, DEVGRU, teams trained for exactly this. But the CIA deputy cut him off. The guards numbered 30. The compound was near civilians. Collateral damage would be unacceptable. And then came the truth. They needed a sniper, perched 2 kilometers away, able to eliminate key sentries with surgical precision. A sniper whose skill bordered on impossible. And they already had one in mind, Emma Carson. Harrington's jaw tightened. She hasn't finished a single phase of SEAL training. She hasn't faced real combat. You'd send a candidate into this. "She's not just a candidate," the CIA deputy said smoothly. "She's been part of a classified preparatory program for 18 months. Carson was always intended for operations like this. Bud S was simply her final evaluation." The words hit him like a blow. His command used as cover for a black operation, without his knowledge, without his consent. His voice dropped low and dangerous. "My program is not a cover. It exists to build warriors, not to serve your agendas." But the secretary leaned forward, calm, cold. "Admiral, 4 Americans are in enemy hands. In 72 hours they'll be moved and recovery becomes impossible. Carson represents our best chance. This is not a request." The silence was suffocating. Harrington's career, his command, his men, all held hostage by politics. "If I refuse," he asked, "then you'll be relieved of command, effective immediately." For a moment, the old admiral stared into the secretary's polished smile, and he saw not a leader but a politician with clean shoes who had never smelled blood in sand. And Harrington knew the truth. They would send Carson whether he stood in their way or not. Finally, he spoke, voice hard. "Then I want full oversight, every detail of the plan, and Maxwell goes with her. If you're going to gamble with her life, she deserves every ounce of preparation we can give her." The secretary agreed. Maxwell inclined his head, eyes shadowed with something unreadable, regret perhaps or guilt. When the meeting ended, Harrington walked out into the night air of Washington with a weight pressing down heavier than the humid summer sky. For decades he had carried the burden of men's lives, but never before had he felt the government push an untested soldier toward death to serve an agenda. Back at Fort Bragg, dawn broke in merciless heat. Carson was already on the track, running alone, sweat streaking her face, each step deliberate. She didn't know yet, but she sensed something. Harrington could see it in the way her shoulders squared when she caught sight of him and Maxwell watching from the shadows. Later in his office, she sat across from him, hair damp from the shower, uniform crisp, eyes sharp. Harrington laid out the truth piece by piece without softening, the program, the deception, the mission. She listened in silence, her expression giving nothing away. Only when he finished did she speak. Her voice was steady. "So for the past 18 months I've been trained without my knowledge for missions like this. And now I'm being deployed to Syria before I've even finished training. That's correct, sir." Harrington nodded. "And why me?" It was Maxwell who answered. Because you can do what few others can. Your shooting trials at Fort Benning flagged you. You outshot instructors with decades of experience. And because you're a woman, this mission needs a female operator. For the first time, her composure cracked, the bitterness sharp. So it is about gender, after all. I thought it was about standards. Harrington unexpectedly felt sympathy. The truth stung him too. Sometimes warfare requires specialized assets, he said quietly. In this case, it gives us tactical advantage, nothing more. Her jaw clenched, but when he asked if she would accept, she didn't hesitate. 4 Americans are being held hostage, sir. Their lives are at risk. What else would I do? Harrington studied her, looking for fear, but what he saw was something else. Anger, yes. Determination, yes. But beneath it all, an almost frightening calm. He gave her the choice again, told her this was volunteer only. No order could compel her. And her answer was the kind of truth that made warriors and broke them all the same. The only reservation I have, sir, is that I haven't completed training. I don't want special treatment. I don't want shortcuts. But if you're asking if I'll go, I will. That night the transformation began. Training Room 3 was remade into a war room. Satellite images, scale models, equipment laid out in meticulous rows. Captain Miller of Delta Force took her through the tactical plan. Maxwell refined her marksmanship for the precise distances. For 12 hours she absorbed everything, her body moving on instinct, her mind a knife. And yet Harrington still doubted. Skills on paper were one thing. Killing men in a compound of sand and stone was another. So they gave her the kill house. It was designed to break people. Role players armed with simunition. Screams, chaos, blood-colored paint marking flesh. The kind of exercise that stripped away illusions and showed who could act when hesitation meant death. Carson took her position high above the mock compound. Miller's team advanced below. Through her scope she tracked threats, called movements, fired when needed. Clean, precise, unwavering. And then the scenario shifted. 6 hostile role players emerged simultaneously, weapons trained on Miller's exposed team. It was a no-win situation. And yet she made it a win. 6 shots, 3 seconds, every target down. Silence followed. Even hardened operators muttered disbelief. Harrington's heart pounded as he asked her later, "When you engaged, what were you thinking?" Her answer was unsettling in its honesty. "I wasn't thinking, sir. Not consciously. Training took over. I acted because if I didn't, they would die." "And afterward, how did you feel?" A shadow passed across her eyes. "Relief. But my father always told me, if killing never troubles you, then you shouldn't be the one holding the rifle. I expect it will affect me. Later, after the mission. But not while lives depend on me." For a long time Harrington said nothing. Then he gave the only words he could. "Deployment approved. Report at 700. That night her barracks door opened. Sullivan, the alpha candidate who had dismissed her days ago, stood with 2 others. Rumors had spread. Everyone knew. Sullivan's voice carried no mockery this time, only something close to respect. "Be careful out there." The words were awkward, but they mattered. Carson gave a small smile. "I will." When they left, the silence of the room closed in again. She finished her preparations with hands steady, mind locked on the mission. But when Robert Maxwell knocked at 100, carrying a small wooden box, her composure finally wavered. Inside was a compass, scratched, tarnished, the one her father had carried into every mission. Maxwell's voice was quiet as he told her the truth. How John Carson had saved his life under fire, carried him through hell, and finished the mission alone. How he had promised to repay that debt, and how Emma was his chance to honor it. She listened, silent, her hand brushing the compass face. Then she asked him the only question that mattered. "If my father hadn't saved you, would you still have recommended me?" Maxwell paused, chose his words carefully. "Yes, because talent like yours deserves to be recognized, no matter who your father was." She said nothing more, only nodded and returned to her gear. Hours later, under floodlights on the flight line, the helicopters waited. Carson adjusted the Macmillan TAC-50 rifle, checked her scope, her ammunition, her vest. Harrington studied her one last time. "You look tired," he said quietly. "I'm operational, sir." He gave her a thin smile. "Pre-mission insomnia, you're in good company." And then the signal came, time to board. Carson saluted, crisp, sharp. Harrington and Maxwell returned it. She turned and walked toward the waiting helicopter. Maxwell called after her, his voice carrying above the roar of the rotors. "Trust your training, Emma, and when the moment comes, take the shot." The Blackhawks lifted off, carving through the pre-dawn darkness. Carson sat among Miller's team, the compass in her vest, her hands steady, her mind quiet. The desert awaited, and so did the question that had shadowed her since the beginning. When the lives of others rested on her, could she do it? She would find out soon enough. Why was the desert so quiet that morning? The Blackhawks dropped into a cloud of dust, rotors thrumming, engines growling against the dawn. Emma Carson stepped out into the arid stillness, her boots sinking slightly into sand and rock. The horizon burned with the first streaks of sunlight, stretching shadows across a jagged landscape. The world felt both infinite and suffocating, the kind of silence that pressed against the ears until the faintest sounds became thunder, the scuff of boots, the click of gear, the distant wind sweeping grit across stone. She followed Captain Miller's team away from the landing zone. 6 hardened Delta operators, their movements fluid and efficient, shadows among shadows. They didn't look back at her. They didn't need to. In their eyes, she would prove herself only in action, not in introductions. Carson adjusted the weight of her pack, the TAC-50 rifle case strapped to her shoulders, her hydration system, extra rounds, survival gear. Normally, a sniper carried with a spotter to share the load. Today she carried it alone. The burden pressed against her spine, but she welcomed it. The pain grounded her. For 2 hours, they moved like phantoms through gullies and ridges, navigating the barren land that would lead them within sight of the target compound. No words were exchanged. Communication was in hand signals, short bursts on secure comms, the unspoken trust of men who had done this before. Carson hadn't. That truth whispered at the back of her mind, but she pushed it aside. Doubt was a luxury she couldn't afford. At the first checkpoint, a dried riverbed, Miller crouched with the team and spread out the tactical map. His voice was low, just above a whisper. "Surveillance confirms 4 hostages still present. Guard rotations as expected. Religious festival in the village begins at 1300. Window opens then. Extraction commences at 1330. Overwatch," he glanced at her. "Your position is here." He tapped the map. A rocky outcrop almost 2 kilometers from the compound. Elevation perfect. Concealment excellent. The farthest target, 1,800 meters, at the very limit of possibility. Carson studied it without flinching. Inside, she felt her pulse quicken. That distance under gusting winds was a knife's edge, but outwardly she nodded once. "Copy." The team dispersed to check equipment and rest in patches of shade. Carson sat apart, methodically reviewing her ammunition, cleaning her scope, rehearsing the plan again and again in her mind. Every variable, wind, heat shimmer, timing, guard patterns, every contingency. A shadow crossed over her. She looked up to see Miller. Tactical sunglasses hid his eyes, but his stance carried weight. He motioned her aside, away from the others. "I want to be clear," he said without preamble. "My team knows what you did at Fort Bragg, the kill house. 6 targets in 3 seconds. They know you can shoot, but they also know you've never seen combat. That matters." Carson met his words without flinching. "You're concerned I'll hesitate." "Yes," Miller said simply. "There's no shame in that. Plenty of good shooters freeze the first time. It's different when you look through the scope and see a human being." She paused, thinking. Then, "My father used to say when killing becomes easy, that's when you should walk away. It should always matter. But when lives are at stake, hesitation costs more than bullets. I won't hesitate." Miller studied her, silent for a long moment. Finally he nodded. "Good, because if you do, my men die." The words landed heavy. She understood. She always had. But hearing it spoken stripped away any illusions left. "Are you confident?" Miller pressed. "Not just in training terms, in reality, with this wind, this distance under combat conditions." Carson didn't pretend certainty. "At this position, probability is 85 to 90% per shot. Moving closer would improve odds, but it would risk detection. This plan balances safety with effectiveness. I accept those odds." Miller tilted his head slightly. A faint trace of respect softened his tone. "That matches my own assessment. I just needed to hear you say it." When he walked away, she felt something she hadn't expected. Inclusion, not full acceptance. Not yet, but respect. A crack in the wall. Time crawled and raced all at once. 4 hours until movement. She lay back against the rocks, eyes half closed, forcing her breathing into a steady rhythm, resting the body, sharpening the mind. She had done this 100 times on the range, but now every minute carried the weight of lives. At 11:30, Miller signaled, "Movement." Carson shouldered the load, adjusted her gear, and followed the team until their paths diverged. One by one, the men clasped her hand, each with a brief phrase. "Shoot straight. See you at exfil. Watch our 6." Miller was last. His grip was firm. "We're counting on you, Carson. I won't let you down." Then she moved alone. The terrain grew harsher. Jagged stone, loose gravel, exposed ridgelines where every step risked detection. She used shadows, dips in the earth, even the cover of drifting clouds to mask her movements. At one point she froze for nearly 10 minutes, lying flat as a pair of guards scanned the ridge through binoculars, unaware of her prone form blended into the stone. By 11:55, she reached the position. The outcrop overlooked the compound with brutal clarity. A natural hollow provided concealment. From here, she could see the courtyard, the guard towers, the paths of patrols. No sign of the hostages, confirming intel that they were held underground. She began setting up with meticulous care. Camouflage netting, stone placement, rifle assembly, scope calibration. The spotting scope Maxwell had given her, advanced sensors reading wind speed, direction, barometric pressure. At 1200 sharp, she checked in. Overwatch in position, systems operational. Miller's voice crackled in her ear. "Copy, Overwatch, extraction team on schedule." Then silence. Sniping was patience, stillness, breathing, waiting for the world to move into alignment. She lay prone, the TAC-50 balanced on its bipod, her cheek resting against the stock. Through the scope, she tracked the compound. Guards walked predictable routes, rifles slung casually, unaware of the eyes watching them from nearly 2 kilometers away. The sun climbed higher. Heat shimmered across the rooftops, distorting outlines. Sweat prickled her skin beneath the ghillie netting, but her breathing stayed calm, controlled. The first hour passed in silence. She observed everything, patterns of dust devils, the rhythm of patrols, the way a guard paused to adjust his cap every 15 minutes. Small details that would later mean survival. At 13:15, radio silence began. Her comms went quiet. She was alone. The village festival drew guards away, just as predicted. By 13:30, the compound's defenses thinned. Miller's team moved, shadows slipping toward the outer wall. Carson's eye never left the scope. She tracked their progress, ready. And then the first test. A guard emerged unexpectedly onto a rooftop, rifle raised, eyes sweeping the courtyard. He stopped, head turning, about to see Miller's men crossing below. Her finger slid onto the trigger. breath steady, heartbeat slow. The world narrowed to a crosshair, a target, a single breath. Exhale, pause, fire. The shot cracked across the desert like distant thunder. A half-second later, the guard dropped silently. Her first kill. The recoil pressed against her shoulder. The scope dipped. When she looked again, he was gone from the rooftop, body crumpled. For a fleeting moment her mind whispered, a life ended. A man who had lived, breath, thought, gone. But then the reality returned. If she hadn't pulled the trigger, Miller's team would be compromised. They would be dead. The hostage mission would collapse. She pushed the thought aside. Not gone, neutralized. That was the word, neutralized. Her comm hissed once, Miller's voice a quick code. Copy, shot, proceeding. No praise, no commentary, just acknowledgement. She shifted slightly, reacquired, scanned the compound. And felt it, a subtle tremor in her chest. Not regret, not yet, something sharper. The dawning awareness that the world had shifted, that she was no longer just a candidate, no longer just training. She had crossed the threshold. The second test came minutes later. Two guards emerged from opposite corners, crossing paths directly in sight of the team's approach vector. If they stopped to talk, if they lingered, they'd see movement in the shadows. Carson tracked the first, then the second. She calculated trajectories, distance, wind gusts. Could she drop them both in time? Her breath steadied, she waited. And then, as if fate intervened, one guard paused, bent to tie a bootlace. The other moved on unaware. A single shot was enough. She fired. The man folded soundlessly. The other continued his patrol, never looking back. Miller's team moved. The mission crept forward. And Emma Carson, lying in the heat and dust, realized the truth her father had once whispered when he thought she wasn't listening. Killing was never about the shot itself. It was about living with what followed. The desert was silent again, but the silence inside her would never be the same. Why did her finger tremble, just for a moment, after that second shot? It wasn't enough for anyone else to notice. The rifle stayed steady. Her scope never wavered, but inside she felt the faintest shiver of something she couldn't name. Not fear, not regret, something stranger. It passed quickly. She forced her breathing back into rhythm. 3 seconds in, 3 seconds out. Her body remembered what her mind couldn't afford to linger on. Through the glass, Miller's team scaled the outer wall of the compound, dark shapes slipping over stone and barbed wire like water flowing uphill. They moved with a silence that came from years of practice, years of blood. Carson tracked them, sweeping the rooftops, every shadow a possible threat. At 13:37, a guard stepped from a doorway into the courtyard. He turned, adjusting his radio, his eyes lifting. Direct line of sight to Miller's men. Emma didn't hesitate. One shot, the guard collapsed, his radio clattering on the stone. Another life ended, another weight on her chest. Miller's voice whispered in her ear, "Copy, keep going." It struck her how little acknowledgement came with each kill. No gratitude, no hesitation, just the cold, clinical necessity of survival. She wasn't being judged by her morality, only her efficiency. Minutes stretched like hours. Her eyes burned from staring, her body aching from holding still, but her focus remained unbroken. And then the mistake. Two guards emerged from the barracks, speaking in low voices. One pointed toward the south gate. The other turned and froze. His eyes locked onto something in the distance. Miller's team, barely visible, shadows against stone. "Target aware," she whispered into the comm. Miller hissed, "Take him." Her crosshairs aligned, she squeezed. The shot rang clean, the man fell. But the other shouted before she could fire again. His voice carried, boots pounded. The compound stirred like a nest of wasps. "Compromise," Miller snapped. "Overwatch, suppress." Emma's calm cracked open into urgency. She swung her scope, acquiring targets as doors flew open and men poured into the courtyard. rifles raised. Bang, one down. Bang, another. Her world shrank to a tunnel of breath, trigger, recoil, target. Her mind went blank of everything except calculations, wind, distance, movement. 6 shots, 6 bodies. The compound erupted in chaos. Shouts in Arabic, boots slamming, doors slamming shut, then open again. Miller's men breached the main entrance, disappearing into the shadows of the compound. "Overwatch cover," Miller barked. She tracked the rooftop. A guard sprinted toward the alarm bell. She fired. His body crumpled against the metal. Another appeared, fumbling with an RPG. One round from her rifle ripped him backward before he could shoulder it. Her chest burned with each breath, but her focus remained iron. She was no longer just protecting the mission. She was the mission. And yet something gnawed at her, a flash of guilt, a whisper of her father's voice. It should never be easy. But she couldn't stop, not now. Below, Miller's team cleared room after room, their gunfire muffled bursts. She could only imagine the chaos inside, the hostages terrified, the enemy desperate. Every second stretched her nerves tighter. At 13:48, a door burst open near the south wing. 2 guards dragged a hostage into the courtyard, blindfolded, hands bound. A bargaining chip, a shield. Carson's heart lurched. The hostage's head turned slightly, female. Her scope locked on the guard's temple, but the angle was tight. The hostage's body shifted, blocking half her shot. A single mistake meant killing the very person she was there to save. Her finger hovered on the trigger. "Overwatch," Miller's voice pressed. "Do you have it?" Seconds bled away. The guard shouted toward the barracks, dragging the hostage closer to the center of the courtyard. Another appeared, rifle raised. Her crosshairs tightened. She slowed her breath, felt the world collapse to a single thread. Bang! The first guard dropped, the hostage tumbling free. Bang! The second fell before he could even register what had happened. The hostage scrambled for cover, screaming behind the blindfold. Miller's men swarmed from the shadows, pulling her to safety. Carson exhaled. Her body shook once hard, then stilled again. But there was no time for relief. "Contact heavy," Miller reported. Gunfire rattled through her earpiece. "We're pinned in the east wing. Overwatch rooftop suppression now." She swung her scope. 4 men on the eastern roofline, pouring fire into the building. Bang, one down. Bang, second. The third ducked. The fourth ran, yelling. Her shot missed, the round sparking stone inches from his head. For the first time, failure seared through her like a brand. She adjusted, breath, focus, bang. The runner collapsed, arms flailing. But the third had already slipped into cover, returning fire blindly toward her position. A spray of rounds sparked rock meters from her head. For the first time, she felt fear claw her throat. She pressed lower, the world shaking with the impact of bullets. Dust stung her eyes. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might break her concentration. Then the fire stopped. Silence. The third rooftop gunner peeked out cautiously, searching. And she fired. His body folded, limp against the roof. Her chest heaved. Her hands shook. Sweat slicked her palms. For the first time, she truly felt the cost, the razor's edge between her survival and theirs. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Through the scope, she saw Miller's men pushing deeper, clearing rooms, dragging hostages toward the courtyard. Time was bleeding away. Exfil had to commence before reinforcements arrived. Then her worst nightmare. A truck roared into the compound from the north gate. 6 armed fighters leaped from the bed, spraying rounds. Miller's men scrambled for cover, the hostages screaming. Carson's rifle snapped to position. Bang, driver down. The truck skidded sideways, slamming into the wall. Bang, 2 fighters dropped. The others scattered, ducking behind the truck. The battlefield erupted, gunfire, shouts, chaos. Through her scope, Carson tracked movement. One fighter sprinted toward a hostage, weapon raised. She fired too late. The fighter grabbed the hostage, yanking him upright, gun pressed against his temple. Her stomach lurched. This was no clean shot. The hostage shielded the man almost completely. Her hands tightened on the rifle. Her breath stuttered. She remembered her father's words again, spoken in the quiet of a kitchen table years ago. Sometimes, Emma, you'll face the shot you can't take, the one that breaks you, the one you'll live with forever. Was this it? Overwatch, do you have him? Miller's voice strained through static. Carson's finger hovered. Every calculation screamed against the shot. Every instinct told her to wait. The fighter shouted, dragging the hostage toward the barracks. Miller's men couldn't risk firing. Seconds ticked. She felt her heart break once in her chest, then harden. She shifted her aim, microscopic, waited for the man's head to lift just a fraction as he barked another order. Bang! The round struck. His body dropped, the hostage collapsing with him untouched. For a second, Carson's chest refused to rise. Then she breathed, a shuddering inhale, as if she'd been underwater too long. Copy clean, Miller said. Relief was there, hidden beneath his clipped tone. By 1358, all 4 hostages were secured in the courtyard. Miller's voice came again. Overwatch, exfil window, 10 minutes, keep the gate clear. Carson wiped sweat from her brow, eyes locked on the compound. She had fired 13 shots, 13 kills, each one etched into her memory like scars. But the mission wasn't over. Not yet. And deep inside she knew something worse was coming, something none of them were prepared for. The silence of the desert was never empty, it was waiting. Why did the desert suddenly feel alive with sound? For hours Emma Carson had lain in silence, her rifle steady, her breathing calm. But now, as Miller's voice confirmed all 4 hostages secured, the air itself seemed to vibrate. Engines in the distance, shouts echoing from the north, the hum of radios. Reinforcements were coming. She pressed tighter against the stock of her rifle, eyes locked through the scope. In the courtyard below, Miller's team herded the hostages toward the south gate, weapons sweeping every angle. They moved fast but not frantic. Professionals. But even professionals bled when the numbers stacked against them. Overwatch status, Miller asked, voice clipped. She forced her own voice steady. Clear Overwatch. No immediate rooftop threats. Possible inbound vehicles from the north. Copy, gate in 2 minutes. Carson tracked the ridgelines. The desert was vast, but movement betrayed itself in subtle shifts. A flicker of light on glass. Dust plumes rising. She adjusted her scope and saw them, 2 technical trucks, mounted machine guns bristling, racing across the flats. At least a dozen fighters in the beds. Contact north, 2 trucks. ETA 90 seconds, she reported. Static crackled. Confirmed, Overwatch, you know what to do. She steadied her breath. A truck moving at 60 miles per hour was no easy target, not at nearly 2 kilometers. She calculated wind drift, lead distance, bullet drop. Exhale, pause, fire. The round punched through the windshield, catching the driver. The truck swerved violently, skidding sideways before flipping onto its side in a spray of sand and smoke. Men spilled like broken dolls. She didn't pause, shifted, acquired, fired again. The second truck's driver slumped, his hand slipping from the wheel. The vehicle veered, slammed into a rock outcropping, erupting into fire. Her rifle bucked, her shoulder throbbed, but she ignored it. Through the scope, the desert burned. Miller's voice came, urgent. Good shooting, gate secure, moving. Carson scanned the compound. More fighters poured through the north entrance, dozens now, rifles flashing in the sun. Her position gave her advantage, but she was one rifle against many. She fired, one fell, then another, but more kept coming. Below, Miller's team hustled the hostages into the open desert. They had less than 5 minutes to reach the extraction point. 5 minutes that could stretch into eternity. Carson's world became a rhythm of death. Acquire, fire, adjust, fire, each shot deliberate, precise, each body falling into dust, but for every one she dropped, 2 more appeared. "Overwatch, they're flanking us," Miller shouted. She shifted her scope. Fighters spread wide along the ridgelines, trying to encircle the exfil route. Too many, too fast. Her mind raced. She couldn't kill them all. She had to slow them, buy time. "South Ridge, 20 meters east of Boulder," she reported, targeting leader. She fired. The man with the radio collapsed. Confusion rippled through the flanking group. Seconds bought. But seconds were all she could give. Her chest heaved now, sweat dripping into her eyes. The sun blazed overhead, heat waves distorting her vision. She blinked hard, forcing clarity. And then movement, close, too close. Through the scope she caught it, a fighter climbing the ridge toward her position. Binoculars in one hand, rifle slung. He had spotted her muzzle flash. Her heart jolted. She swung the rifle, fired, missed. The round sparked stone. The man scrambled higher. She cycled the bolt, fired again. This time clean. His body tumbled backward down the slope. Her hands trembled as she reloaded. She had been compromised. More would come. The comm crackled. Miller's voice urgent. "Overwatch, fall back. We've got them from here." But Carson's eyes locked through the scope again. Fighters massed near the east gate, 30 at least, moving fast. If she left now, Miller's team would be swallowed whole. "No," she said, voice firm. "I stay until you reach the LZ." "Carson," Miller began, but she cut him off. "That's an order I'm giving myself." Silence, then, "Copy, don't die on me." Her lips twitched, almost a smile, not planning to. She settled back into the rifle. Her body screamed with fatigue, her shoulder bruised from recoil, her throat dry as sand. But her mind narrowed to a point of steel. Bang, one down. Bang, another. She slowed them, one by one, her bullets carving time into the desert. Through the scope she saw Miller's team crest the final ridge toward the extraction point. Dust clouds rose behind them, helicopters inbound, the sound of salvation. And then the nightmare. An RPG streaked from the compound, arcing toward Miller's men. She tracked it, powerless to stop what was already in the air. The explosion tore the ground behind the team, throwing dust and bodies. Carson's breath froze. For one endless second she thought they were gone. But shapes rose, staggered, bloody but alive. Her relief was a knife that cut deep. "Miller status," she gasped. "Minor wounds, keep them off us." Her vision blurred with sweat, but she forced it clear. More fighters poured from the compound, relentless. Her rounds cut them down, but her magazine ran dry. She reloaded with shaking hands. Her mind whispered the truth. She couldn't hold them forever. The comm roared with helicopter engines now, Blackhawks sweeping low, rotors thrashing the air. The extraction was seconds away. "Overwatch, break now," Miller ordered. Carson hesitated, her rifle still tracking targets. She could leave. She should leave. But if she stayed seconds longer, just seconds, she could buy them safety. Her father's compass pressed against her chest, a weight heavier than stone. She whispered under her breath, "Just a little more." Her scope aligned. Bang, a gunner fell. Bang, another dropped. The fighters wavered, broken by precision they couldn't see, couldn't fight. Miller's men dashed into the waiting Blackhawks, hostages pulled aboard. Only then did she push away from the rifle, grabbing her pack, scrambling backward down the rocky slope. Bullets whipped overhead, chipping stone, biting sand. She slid, tumbled, rolled, then caught herself, legs burning, lungs screaming. Her comm crackled with Miller's voice. "Overwatch, where are you?" "On my way," she panted, sprinting across open ground. The helicopters lifted, hovering low, gunners laying suppressing fire. Carson ran, every step a battle, her gear dragging her down. She stumbled, fell, forced herself up again. A voice shouted behind her. She glanced back, fighters cresting the ridge, rifles raised. She pushed harder, her chest seared with fire, her legs heavy as lead. The compass thumped against her ribs with every step. A rope dropped from the nearest Blackhawk, swaying just above the ground. Miller leaned out, shouting, "Carson, now!" She leapt, catching the rope with both hands. Her body jolted as the helicopter lifted, dragging her upward, desert spinning below. Bullets snapped past, tracer fire streaking the air. Her grip burned, her muscles screamed, but she held on. The Blackhawk climbed higher, pulling her away from the chaos below. Finally, she was yanked inside by strong hands. Miller's. His face was streaked with dust and blood, but his eyes were alive. "You did it," he said, voice raw. Carson collapsed against the floor, chest heaving, rifle still clutched in her hands. She didn't answer. Couldn't. The desert shrank beneath them, smoke curling into the sky, bodies lying in the sand. She stared at the scope, at the glass that had framed every kill, every life she had ended. Her hands shook now, not from fatigue, from the weight of what she had done. No one spoke. The rotors thundered, the hostages sobbed quietly. Miller checked his men. And Carson sat in silence, her mind replaying every shot, every breath, every face she would never see again except in memory. For the first time since the mission began, tears welled in her eyes, not for herself, not even for the men she had killed, but for the truth her father had left her with. If it ever stops mattering, you've lost yourself. It mattered, God, it mattered. And as the Blackhawks carried them away from the battlefield, Emma Carson knew she had not lost herself. Not yet. But she also knew this was only the beginning. Why was the silence in the helicopter louder than the firefight they had just escaped? Emma Carson sat with her back against the vibrating fuselage, her rifle across her lap, her chest heaving. Dust caked her face, streaked by sweat. Her hands shook faintly, though she kept them folded tight to hide it. Around her, Miller's men checked wounds, reloaded magazines, soothed the trembling hostages. The rotors thundered above, but inside, the silence pressed down like a storm cloud waiting to break. No one looked at her. Not yet. She was the newcomer, the untested variable who had just shifted into something else entirely. They didn't know what to make of her. Neither did she. Maxwell leaned forward from across the cabin, eyes on her. The old sniper didn't speak, didn't smile. He only studied her face the way a surgeon studies an X-ray, searching for cracks invisible to everyone else. Miller broke the silence first. "We'll need a debrief at forward base. Intel's already hungry for every detail." His tone was steady, clipped, but beneath it lay exhaustion. His left arm was wrapped in a makeshift bandage, blood seeping slowly through. One of his men glanced at Emma. "Hell of a shot, ma'am, all of them." The words landed awkwardly, like an offering in a foreign language. Respect, raw and uneasy. Emma gave the smallest nod. Her throat was too dry for thanks. When the Blackhawks touched down at the forward operating base, the night had fallen. Spotlights bathed the tarmac in harsh white. Medics rushed the hostages away. Miller's team disembarked, moving toward the field hospital. Emma lingered, her boots rooted to the steel floor, until Maxwell appeared at her side. "Come on," he said quietly. She followed him into a dimly lit tent. Away from the chaos, the sudden quiet felt oppressive. The scent of sand, sweat, and gun oil hung in the air. She unstrapped her vest, her shoulders aching, the compass pressing against her ribs with familiar weight. Maxwell poured 2 cups of bitter instant coffee and handed one to her. She stared at it for a long time before setting it down untouched. "You saved them," he said. His voice carried no flourish, no dramatics, just truth. Her reply came slowly. "I killed I don't know how many, I stopped counting." Maxwell nodded. "That's normal. You remember the ones you can't forget, the rest fade." She looked up, her eyes hard. "Do they fade, or do you bury them so deep you pretend they're gone?" The question cut straight through him. His jaw tightened. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, worn photo. A younger Maxwell, smiling faintly, standing beside two men in desert fatigues. One of them was her father. "He saved me," Maxwell said, his voice rough. "Dragged me out of hell when I should have died. Every mission after every kill I made, I told myself it was repayment, but I know the truth. You never repay a debt like that. Not really." Emma traced her thumb along the edge of the compass at her chest. Her father's compass. The man who had walked into battles without hesitation, who had left his daughter with fragments of wisdom and a shadow too large to ever escape. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" she asked. Maxwell's eyes softened. "Because I wanted you to make your own choice, not out of loyalty to him, out of loyalty to yourself." She looked away, her chest heavy. "And now, what choice do I have left?" He leaned closer. "You chose today. You chose to stay when you could have run, to shoot when hesitation would have killed others. Don't let guilt rob you of what that means." Her silence stretched. The compass seemed to pulse against her ribs. Hours later, in the command post, Admiral Harrington received the after-action report. He read it twice, then a third time. Each line pulled him deeper into conflict. Carson, 13 confirmed kills, 2 vehicle stops at distance, 1 hostage rescue under shield conditions. It was a report written in cold numbers, but to him, every number was blood. When he finally looked up, the room was empty save for Maxwell, who stood at the far wall. Their eyes met. "You were right," Harrington said bitterly. "She performed." Maxwell shook his head. "This isn't about being right. It's about her carrying weight no one should carry this early." Harrington's hand tightened around the paper. "She wasn't ready." "She was," Maxwell countered. "That's the problem." Silence hung heavy. Harrington felt the war inside himself, the veteran who demanded standards, the commander who carried graves in his memory, the man who had doubted her from the start. And beneath it all, something quieter, something dangerously close to pride. At dawn, Emma stood alone outside the barracks, watching the horizon glow. The desert stretched endless before her, painted in soft reds and golds. She hadn't slept. She hadn't tried. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the rooftop guard, the hostage shield, the RPG streaking across the sky. She felt the trigger beneath her finger. She heard the silence after each shot. Her chest ached, not from fatigue, from the weight of knowing she had done everything right and yet still felt hollow. Harrington approached quietly, his limp more pronounced in the morning chill. He stopped beside her, his eyes fixed on the horizon as well. "You kept them alive," he said softly. Her voice was low, steady, "at a cost." "Always at a cost," he admitted. "That never changes." She turned to him, her eyes searching. "Did you ever stop counting, remembering?" Harrington's jaw tightened. He took a long breath. "No, I still see them, every name, every face. Sometimes I wonder if the weight keeps me human or if it's what's breaking me." Her throat tightened. She wanted to tell him about the trembling in her hands, the hollow in her chest. She wanted to ask if it ever became bearable, but instead she whispered, "Then maybe breaking is the price." The two of them stood in silence, the desert wind curling around them. For the first time, Harrington didn't see a candidate. He saw a soldier, not because of her kills, not because of her father, but because she understood the burden. Later that day, Washington called. Commendations, praise, political triumph. The mission was already being spun into headlines. But when Harrington informed her, Emma only asked one question. "What about the men I killed? Will their names be written anywhere?" The silence that followed was answer enough. That night she sat in her bunk, the compass resting in her hand. Maxwell stopped by briefly, his words simple. "Sleep when you can, remember when you must." When he left, she lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, hearing again the echo of her father's voice. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She didn't feel dignified. She felt raw, fragile, human, but maybe that was the point. Maybe surviving wasn't about walking away clean. Maybe it was about carrying the weight and still standing. And as exhaustion finally dragged her under, she wondered, not with fear but with a grim, quiet certainty, when the next mission would come. Because she knew now, it wasn't over, it never would be. Why was the briefing room colder than the desert battlefield she just left behind? Emma Carson sat at the long steel table, the tactical map projected across its surface. The air hummed with tension. Around her, operators and officers murmured, their voices low, their glances sharp. She felt them measuring her, weighing her, not because she was unproven anymore, but because she had proven too much. 13 confirmed kills, 4 hostages saved, a candidate who had stepped into combat and walked back alive. It should have been triumph. Instead, it was suspicion. The CIA deputy leaned forward, his fingers tapping the map. We've intercepted intel on a high-value target, senior logistics commander for the insurgent network, responsible for supply chains, funding lines, weapons smuggling. Eliminate him, and we cripple their capacity for months. Emma listened without flinching. She knew what was coming before he said it. Carson will provide overwatch, again. The room shifted. Operators exchanged glances. Miller's jaw tightened, though he said nothing. Harrington's lips pressed into a thin line. Maxwell's eyes flicked toward her, unreadable. Emma kept her expression neutral. Inside, her stomach knotted. Another mission so soon. No time to process, no time to breathe. They weren't giving her space to recover, they were pushing her deeper. Harrington spoke at last. His voice carried the gravel of years. She's not a tool you can keep throwing into the fire. She hasn't even finished training. You're burning her alive for your optics. The CIA deputy didn't blink. With respect, Admiral, Carson is an asset. Assets are deployed where they provide the greatest return. Emma clenched her jaw, not soldier, not sniper, asset. Maxwell finally spoke, calm but firm. If she goes, she doesn't go alone. Not this time. She gets a spotter, standard protocol. The deputy arched an eyebrow. And who would you suggest? I will, Maxwell said. The room stilled. Even Harrington turned his head, eyes narrowing. The Iron Man, volunteering to crawl back into combat shadows he had sworn off years ago. Emma said nothing, but her chest tightened, not with relief but with something more complicated. Gratitude tangled with suspicion. Why was he doing this? Debt, duty, or guilt? Hours later on the flight line, the roar of transport engines filled the night. Emma checked her gear mechanically, scope adjusted, ammunition loaded, ghillie suit packed. Her hands moved with precision, but her thoughts wandered. She remembered the first rooftop guard, the hostage shield, the RPG fire streaking across the sky, 13 shots, 13 ghosts. Would tonight add more? Maxwell appeared at her side, adjusting his own pack. He carried a suppressed rifle, smaller than hers, suited for close work. His movements were slower than in his prime, but deliberate, unshaken. He caught her glance. You think I'm here to protect you? Aren't you? She asked quietly. He studied her, the lines on his face deepening. I'm here to see if you can carry this weight, because once you start, there's no going back. Her reply was simple. I've already started. The Black Hawk lifted them into darkness, carrying them toward another war. Their insertion point was 10 kilometers from the target village, a cluster of mud brick houses clinging to a river bend. The target operated from within, shielded by civilians. Precision was essential. They moved by night, shadows among shadows. Maxwell led through gullies and dry creek beds, his instincts still razor-sharp. Emma followed, her senses alive. Every rustle of wind against brush, every shift of sand beneath her boots felt magnified. By 200, they reached the overwatch position, a ridge overlooking the village. From here, the target's safe house was visible, a squat structure at the edge of town. Guards lingered at the entrance, smoking, their rifles slung carelessly. Children slept in nearby houses. Women moved in courtyards, unaware of the crosshairs circling above them. Emma set up the TAC-50, laying prone beside Maxwell. He deployed the spotting scope, calibrating wind and distance. For the first time, she felt what it meant to have someone at her side. The silence wasn't so suffocating with another set of eyes sharing it. "Wind steady," Maxwell murmured. 7 knots east to west. Distance 1,500 meters. You've done harder." She exhaled, steady. "Not with children in the next house." His voice was quiet. "That's what makes it harder. That's what makes it matter." Hours passed in stillness. They lay side by side, watching, waiting. The guards shifted, laughed, smoked. A dog barked somewhere in the village. The river shimmered faintly under moonlight. At 4:17, the target emerged. Tall, broad-shouldered, a scarf draped loosely around his neck. He spoke briefly to one guard, then stepped into the courtyard, stretching as though the war around him didn't exist. Emma's crosshairs settled on his chest. Her finger brushed the trigger. And then she froze. Through the scope she saw a boy, no older than 12, carrying a jug of water crossing the courtyard. The boy passed directly behind the target, his small body framed in Emma's scope. Her chest seized. If she fired now, one twitch of the target, one miscalculation, and she would kill the boy. Maxwell's voice came low, controlled. "Wait." Her breath caught. Sweat slicked her palms. Her heart hammered so loudly she swore the enemy could hear it. The boy moved slowly, deliberately, placing the jug down near the wall. Seconds stretched into eternity. Finally, the boy slipped back inside. The crosshairs cleared. "Take the shot," Maxwell whispered. Her finger tightened. The world narrowed to breath, heartbeat glass. Bang! The target collapsed instantly, his body folding into the dirt. The courtyard erupted in shouts, guards scrambling, women screaming. Emma cycled the bolt, already shifting to the nearest guard. Bang! He dropped. Maxwell called wind. She fired again, another fell. But the village stirred like a hive, lights flickering on, shadows moving. Emma's stomach twisted. Civilians, innocents. Their mission was precise, surgical, but war was never surgical. Not really. Through her scope, she saw a woman rush to the fallen target's body, wailing, clutching his lifeless form. Emma's chest ached. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't. Maxwell spoke softly beside her. "You see now why it never gets easier." The exfil call came quickly. Miller's team swept through the village, securing intelligence, recovering devices. Emma provided cover fire when needed, each shot measured, deliberate. By dawn, they were moving again, retreating through gullies, leaving the village behind. But Emma carried it with her, the boy, the woman, the wail that still echoed in her ears. At the extraction point, as the Black Hawk lifted them skyward, Harrington's voice crackled over secure comms. "Mission accomplished. Clean hit. Outstanding work." Emma said nothing. Maxwell finally glanced at her. His eyes held no pride, no triumph, only understanding. "Don't mistake survival for victory," he murmured. She looked down at her hands. They were steady again, too steady. And that frightened her more than the shaking ever had. Why did the applause in Washington feel emptier than the silence of the desert? Emma Carson stood stiff in her dress uniform, the bright lights of the Pentagon auditorium glaring down on her like an interrogation lamp. Her name echoed through the hall, spoken by the Secretary of Defense himself. Commendation for valor, a citation that would be framed on a wall somewhere. The audience clapped politely. Some stood, cameras flashed. To them she was a symbol, proof, a headline. To her it was noise. Her chest rose and fell slowly, her jaw tight. Every word spoken about her courage and precision carried the weight of ghosts. The rooftop guard, the hostage shield, the boy with the jug of water, the woman wailing over her dead brother. Harrington sat in the second row, his uniform pressed, his face carved from stone. He didn't clap, not because he disapproved, but because he understood. Maxwell leaned against the far wall, half in shadow, his eyes fixed on her. He, too, remained silent. After the ceremony, Emma slipped away, leaving the polished halls and handshakes behind. She found herself outside in the cold Washington air, the city alive with noise and traffic. She breathed deep, but the air felt thin. Harrington joined her minutes later, his limp slower in the winter chill. He stopped beside her, staring out at the monuments glowing against the night. "You don't want this, do you?" he said quietly. Emma's voice was flat. "I don't want a ribbon that makes strangers clap for things they'll never understand." He nodded slowly. "I felt the same the first time they pinned a medal on me. All I could think of were the men who didn't make it back, their families sitting in the dark while I stood in the light. I wanted to tear it off." She glanced at him. "Why didn't you?" His jaw tightened. "Because it wasn't for me. It was for them, their names, their memory. Every ribbon I wear is a headstone I carry." Her throat constricted. She wanted to argue, but the words caught in her chest. She knew he was right, and yet the hollowness remained. Maxwell approached then, his heavy boots crunching against the stone walkway. He didn't speak at first, just studied the two of them, commander and candidate, bound now by battles neither had chosen. Finally he said, "You've seen it, Carson, what most never will, and you'll see more. That's the path you're on. You don't get to go back." Her eyes searched his face. "Do you regret it, any of it?" Maxwell's silence stretched. The man once called the Iron Man, the sniper whose legend carried across continents, finally spoke in a voice almost broken. "Every day. And yet if I had to, I'd do it all again. That's the curse. And the truth." Emma turned away, the compass in her pocket pressing like a heartbeat. Her father's compass. The weight of everything she had inherited, chosen or not. That night, alone in her quarters, she laid the compass on the desk. She traced the scratches, the worn brass, the tiny needle still pointing north. Her father had carried it through deserts, jungles, cities torn apart. Now it was hers. She whispered to the empty room, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can carry this, Dad. I don't know if I should." But the silence gave no answer. Only the faint hum of the heater, the distant sound of traffic. Days passed, training resumed. She ran with the others, lifted, swam, endured the relentless grind of Bud S. But now, the men who had doubted her no longer looked at her as an intruder. They looked at her with something else, respect, edged with unease. She had been tested in blood before her time. She had returned alive. That set her apart. Some whispered she was lucky, others said she was dangerous. Few said it to her face. At night she dreamed of the desert, of crosshairs, of shouts, of silence after the shots. She woke sweating, her hands trembling. But in the morning she rose, laced her boots, carried on. One evening Harrington summoned her. His office was dim, the blinds half closed, the smell of coffee lingering. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "They'll send you out again," he said. "Sooner than you should be sent. You've proven yourself too capable for them to ignore." Emma nodded once. "I know." His eyes hardened. "That terrifies me, because every mission strips something away, and I don't want to see you lose what makes you who you are." Her voice was steady. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe who I am isn't what matters. Maybe what I do is." Harrington leaned forward, his voice sharp. "Don't ever believe that. You're not just a rifle. You're not just a trigger. You're a person. And when you forget that, you're already lost." Her chest tightened, but she said nothing. After she left, Harrington sat alone, staring at the folder on his desk. Emma Carson, candidate, operative, daughter of John Carson. He closed the file slowly, his hand trembling. Maxwell found her later in the range, alone as always. She fired round after round, each bullet carving perfect holes into the target. Her precision was terrifying in its calmness. He watched her for a long time before speaking. Do you know what frightens me most about you? She lowered the rifle, sweat streaking her face. What? That you don't miss, he said softly. Because missing teaches you something. It humbles you. It reminds you you're human. But every time you pull that trigger, the world bends to you. And that can break a person faster than failure ever could. Her eyes narrowed. Are you saying I should want to miss? I'm saying I hope one day you do, Maxwell replied. Because that day will prove you're still more than just the shot. She didn't answer. She loaded another magazine, fired again. Perfect, always perfect. Weeks later, deployment orders came. Another mission, another desert, another shadow to step into. As she boarded the aircraft, compass in her pocket, rifle at her side, she caught Harrington's gaze one last time. His salute was crisp, but his eyes betrayed something else: fear, pride, sorrow. Maxwell's voice carried through the roar of engines. Remember, Emma, it's not the killing that defines you, it's what you carry afterward. She nodded once, said nothing, turned and disappeared into the bird. The engines thundered, the plane lifted into the night sky. And Harrington, standing on the tarmac, whispered into the darkness, not to her but to the names etched in his memory. God help her, God help us all. Far above, Emma sat in silence, the compass warm against her chest, her eyes fixed on the void ahead. She didn't know what waited. She didn't know what she would lose. But she knew one truth, sharp as a blade, heavy as a grave. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.